The following program is sponsored by Keep Oregon Green and Travel Oregon.
It's a familiar threat we face every single year.
Wow, look at that.
Wildfires ripping across the Northwest.
We really didn't think it could happen to us, and it did.
2025 is no different. The state of Oregon bracing for another challenging wildfire season following a record-breaking year last year.
You can see a lot of people are trying to come in, trying to rescue their animals and other belongings, but deputies are not letting anyone in.
What can be done so history doesn't repeat itself?
We are on your side tracking everything from state preparedness.
People need to understand the fire season has begun.
To lessons learned.
Why don't you put all power lines underground? Well, it's not that simple.
To prevention and possible solutions, like the first fire-resistant neighborhood in the U.S.
So far, our customers are really pleased with it.
A familiar threat. 2025 wildfire season starts right now. Hello, and thanks for joining us for a familiar threat 2025 wildfire season. I'm Angelica Thornton.
And I'm Rhonda Shelby. The burn scars across our landscape tell a story. Oregon is no stranger to disastrous wildfires.
Last year was record-breaking, nearly 2 million acres burned statewide.
The word wildfire implies that fires happen in the wild, far removed from most population centers. But across the West, emergency leaders are increasingly warning about a newer kind of battle.
We begin our coverage a little south in Salt Lake City. As Lincoln Graves with our sister station, KUTV, explains, urban fires threaten our cities too.
Across the American West, more and more urban city dwellers are thinking about fire danger.
The first year we were here, I was like,
It's crossed Marie Riker's mind.
well, maybe a little bit in the summertime when all the green weeds turn brown.
As well as the mind of her neighbor,
About 28 years.
Randy Hansen.
These weeds here on the hillside here just start to get out of hand.
Marie and Randy don't live in typical wildfire country. A suburban Salt Lake City neighborhood, far from deep forests or rugged hillsides. A major freeway 100 yards away. But across the street, the Jordan River Parkway. A peaceful, tranquil place most of the time, but where vegetation can dry out and become fuel for wildfires.
You live in the middle of the valley, basically, right? You're far from the mountains.
Right.
But you've worried about wildfire before.
Oh yeah. Yeah, after seeing, the fires in LA and everything and how devastating it can just destroy a whole neighborhood in a heartbeat.
The Los Angeles wildfires are the most recent example of how flames can race through urban neighborhoods. At least 30 people were killed. More than 18,000 structures, mostly homes, were burned. A year and a half earlier, a wildfire destroyed Lahaina, Hawaii, killing more than 100. And a year and a half before that, the Marshall Fire roared across neighborhoods near Boulder, Colorado, killing 2 and burning more than 1,000 homes. All these fires started as wildfires, which then moved toward neighborhoods.
But then it moves into something that is very different, and that is that structure-to-structure ignition.
Brent Olson is Division Chief of Wildland Operations for Clackamas Fire, a department in suburban Portland, Oregon. His agency very nearly had a worst-case scenario in the fall of 2020, when historic wildfires came close to major population centers. 500,000 people were under some level of evacuation order.
We really didn't think it could happen to us, and it did.
Olson says that if fires reach urban areas, spread by extreme conditions, everything changes.
And at that point, I no longer term it a wildfire and what we traditionally think of as trees and brush and things of that nature. It really morphs into that more closely aligns with an urban conflagration.
Crews are somewhat powerless when a fire reaches that point, but that doesn't mean urban areas aren't trying to prepare. The 2020 fires led Olson's agency to create a 20-person Type 2 strike team. It was the first such wildland hand crew set up by a structural fire department in Oregon.
We've just onboarded and started their initial training for the 2025 season.
Elsewhere in the West, like Las Vegas and its hot desert climate, vegetation fires are somewhat less common. That is unless extremely wet years lead to a bumper grass crop, which later become tinder dry fuel. In those years, Vegas area departments will zero in on prevention and preparation.
We see the trends with us. When we have grass years, we want to be a little bit more protective of what we have going on. We want to push prevention more. We want to say, hey, don't be going out there doing your illegal fireworks.
Some cities now have wildland-specific fire stations. This is one in the Avenues neighborhood of Salt Lake City, with different types of engines to access rugged terrain.
And then we have a Type 3 that's housed at one of our wildland stations that is meant for wildland apparatus, and also Type 6s for wildland apparatus, so that we can get into those more difficult terrain areas.
Many lines of defense to stop an urban conflagration, but the last line of defense might just be homeowners themselves. While Marie loves living across from the river, she has occasionally wondered if bad behavior might prove disastrous.
We get a lot of walkers through here, and I guess if somebody's smoking and drops their cigarette, I guess it could be.
Started burning up that way.
Randy worries much more. As river vegetation grows and dries out, he takes matters into his own hands.
I get over there with my own private lawnmower and personal lawnmower and take it down, cut it down, just try to clean it up.
A last stand effort to stop a wildfire from spreading to his home and the homes of his neighbors.
Keep an eye on it, because we could be in the same boat LA was. You just never know.
I'm Lincoln Graves reporting.
In Oregon, officials have warned 2025 wildfire season is shaping up to be eerily similar to last year. But what exactly does that mean? Here's a look at the numbers. Oregon saw a record 1.9 million acres burned in 2024. The state's 10-year average, 640,000 acres per season.
At least 42 homes and 132 other buildings were destroyed. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek invoked the Emergency Conflagration Act a record 17 times to mobilize resources. Costs exceeded $350 million. Not only are conditions expected to be similar this year, temperatures are expected to be hotter. The state has benefited from a wet winter and strong snowpack, but dried vegetation could increase the fire risk later this season. During the first week of May, Wildfire Awareness Month, Governor Kotek shared how the state is preparing. Oregon's fire response is powered by the Fire Mutual Aid System. It is a network of roughly 1,100 firefighters from over 300 local agencies. This summer, a state-funded grant is adding 1,500 seasonal wildland firefighters. The Oregon Department of Forestry also plans to hire more than 400 seasonal wildland firefighters. The state plans to pre-position helicopters, planes, and other resources based on shifting fire risk. Equipment locations may be adjusted weekly to target high-risk areas like eastern Oregon, where the Durkee fire burned nearly 300,000 acres last year. But while the state stands ready, the governor says it's on everyone to do their part too.
We are already hearing call-outs for debris burns on private property that have gotten out of control. People need to understand the fire season has begun.
Last year, 60% of wildfires in Oregon were human-caused.
While rare in the past, some power companies have been on the hook, such as the case in California in 2018. Since then, PG&E has committed to moving some power lines underground. K2's Barry Mangold explains how this move could mitigate wildfire risk, but why it also comes with a price of its own.
The 2018 Camp Fire in California left communities devastated. 85 killed, 18,000 structures destroyed. The city of Paradise left mostly in ashes. The fire sparked by power lines owned by the utility company, Pacific Gas and Electric. Wildfires started by power lines like these are actually uncommon. Nearly 90% of all the wildfires in 2024 were human-caused. But with the threat of wildfires raging once again going into this summer season, utility companies are doing everything they can to prevent the next big blaze. And one city in Colorado is decades ahead of the curve.
We feel really comfortable that we've mitigated that risk.
Travis Walker is the Power and Light Director for Fort Collins. Since the 1970s, the city has undergrounded over 99% of its nearly 2,000 miles of distribution lines.
So for the average resident of Fort Collins,
How often do they experience a power outage in a given year?
Sure. So the average customer in Fort Collins sees a 45-minute outage every 4 years.
45 minutes every 4 years.
Yes.
Is there any risk of starting a wildfire with underground power lines?
I would say it's not zero. You know, there might be cables that come up into a transformer, and that transformer might fault and, you know, throw some flames out the side, but it's very, very rare that that would happen.
Since the Camp Fire, PG&E has committed to move 10,000 miles of power lines underground, which is roughly 10% of its distribution system. The company says the change nearly eliminates wildfire ignition risk, and it's not the only one that thinks so. In Utah, Rocky Mountain Power started work to underground lines in high-risk areas in 2022. The same goes for NV Energy in Nevada, which started focusing on undergrounding around Lake Tahoe in 2023. And just this year, Idaho Power identified 7 miles of lines to underground through 2026, which begs the question.
Why don't you put all power lines underground? Well, it's not that simple.
In Oregon, Portland General Electric has nearly 29,000 miles of transmission line in its power grid, which is less than a third than its California counterpart, PG&E.
And so it is. It's easy to look at that and
John Farmer, the public affairs officer at Portland General, says more than half are already in the dirt. He says the reason they don't underground everything comes down to the customer. How much would it cost to underground the rest of it?
So, one of the things when you think about undergrounding power lines, cost is one of the key factors that you have to think about. If we were to put our entire distribution system underground right now, the cost would be on the order of tens of billions of dollars.
Tens of billions.
Tens of billions of dollars.
That cost, he says, would translate to power bills going up by thousands of dollars for every customer. Compare that cost to the roughly $25 billion that PG&E had to pay to settle lawsuits related to the Camp Fire and other blazes in the late 2010s. Farmer says the utility considers the cost of uprooting buried power lines for routine maintenance and instead invests in meteorologists, AI-powered cameras to spot smoke, fire-resistant poles, and early alert systems.
Undergrounding is effective, no doubt. However, it is not always the most effective or most cost-effective or most appropriate solution for a certain stretch of power lines.
Do you think it's worth the trade-off?
It has been for us.
In Portland, I'm Barry Mangold reporting.
Coming up, creating defensible space can make all the difference when it comes to protecting your home. But one builder is going even further. A look inside the country's first fire-resistant neighborhood.
We were completely encircled in smoke. Yeah, you couldn't see more than 25 yards.
When we think of destructive wildfires, what often comes to mind is not last year, but the devastating Labor Day wildfires in 2020.
As you just heard from 2 homeowners in Clackamas County, the memories of that year are still fresh.
And that sparked some changes. Clackamas County's disaster manager says after the 2020 Labor Day wildfires, they took a closer look at their process for evacuations. They say they've improved their alert system and wildfire evacuation map to now include 7 different languages.
As for the power companies, Portland General Electric says they have equipment to monitor the weather and a whole team of foresters and arborists who help manage vegetation and determine what trees pose a risk to infrastructure. Crews work to remove vegetation that could become fire fuel. Pacific Power says it has already invested $1 billion across its 6-state system in wildfire prevention strategies. They plan to invest another $2 billion in systems strengthening through 2027. They also use hundreds of weather stations to collect data like temperature, wind, moisture levels, and wind gusts. That data also helps them to better mitigate wildfire risk.
When it comes to wildfire prevention, Oregon state leaders say preparing your home could make all the difference. The Oregon State Fire Marshal says creating defensible space around your home is one of the most effective ways to protect your property and community. Here are a few actions homeowners can take right now. Space and prune trees to keep flames from canopies. Remove leaves, pine needles, bark mulch, or other debris within 100 feet of structures. Clear roofs and gutters. Keep plants trimmed and clear of dead material, especially near your home, and move combustible material like firewood away. And avoid planting anything directly under eaves. Aim for a 5-foot buffer. The infographic from OSFM illustrates defensible space. As you clean up your property, be mindful of how you dispose material. Chip, compost, or recycle it. If burning is necessary, be sure to follow local rules. As you heard Governor Kotek say earlier in our newscast, debris burns have already caused issues this year. In fact, runaway debris burns are the leading cause of human-caused wildfires in the state of Oregon, followed by equipment use.
Properly clearing dry brush and grass from your property is a good first step to protecting your home.
But one builder in San Diego County has turned things up a notch. They have created the country's first fire-resistant neighborhood. Liz Gonzalez with our sister station, Fox 26 in Fresno, reports.
Watch this test in a research chamber as embers fly towards a home. 4 minutes in, and the mulch on the left side is starting to smolder. 8 minutes in, there are now flames, and by the 12-minute mark, those flames have spread to the porch, while the right side remains virtually untouched. The difference? It's following standards developed by the nonprofit Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, or IBHS.
Their program takes that to a little bit of a different level.
Steve Ruffner is the president of KB Home Coastal, the company behind the country's first fire-resistant and fire-prepared neighborhood in Escondido.
We are building in a very high fire zone because we're at the foot of a mountain, or basically a hillside in San Diego County.
But all 64 homes in the Dixon Trails neighborhood are designed to protect against direct flame contact, radiant heat, and embers. They feature Class A fire-rated roofs, non-combustible gutters, upgraded windows and doors, and ember and flame-resistant vents.
And then the eaves are stuccoed so that embers can't get up into the attic. So there's no open eaves. And then the vents are all the fire-resistant 1/8-inch mesh, which prevents embers from going into the vent structures.
They also feature fences made out of metal instead of wood, which can catch fire, and a 5-foot buffer zone around the home.
IBHS found in the fires that were recent in LA that was a big problem, is that, vegetation and ignition points around the house were really difficult to control.
Ruffner says taking these measures from the onset of construction is a game changer compared to doing it to an older home.
Of course, it's not just homeowners who share the responsibility of wildfire prevention. If you live in the Northwest and you love the outdoors, you have a role to play every time you venture outside. When traveling, OSFM asks that you avoid driving or parking on dry grass. Your car could start a fire. Ensure all parts of your car are secure and no chains are dragging. Carry a shovel, bucket, and fire extinguisher with you. When camping, check burn restrictions. Only light campfires when it's safe and allowed. Stay with your fire, and when you're done, put it out completely. When cooking outside, only use grills or smokers outdoors. Dispose of coals and ash only when they're cool.
Still to come, proof things can always change. Oregon started the year with a great snowpack and little drought. Why that doesn't spell relief for wildfire season. From a powder-packed ski season on our mountains to a bone-dry summer in our forests, conditions can be fluid in Oregon.
In January, Oregon's snowpack was well above average, the best since 2022. Last January, we had one of the lowest snowpacks on record.
The good news continued in April when Oregon saw its first stretch without drought for the first time since November 2019. During the same time last year, Central Oregon and some parts of Eastern Oregon were in drought. As spring and summer continued, conditions got worse. As of mid-May this year, parts of the state were already abnormally dry. We should note the last time Oregon was drought-free, November 2019, was less than a year before the devastating 2020 Labor Day wildfires. Again, things can always change. So let's talk about wildfire conditions this season. Rhonda, we know it's going to be hotter. What else do we need to know, and when can we expect fire activity to ramp up?
We can get a couple of clues from NOAA's seasonal outlook, so let's take a sneak peek at that right now. And yep, the Pacific Northwest is clearly in the hot zone. We're looking at more than a 60% chance of above normal temperatures, which is pretty significant. Now, even though we came out of winter with a strong snowpack, April really threw us for a loop. It was so dry that all of the snow moisture we were counting on is now basically gone. The soil dried out really fast and canceled out a lot of the gains we made over the winter season. In fact, for several cities across Oregon and Washington, April 2025 was one of their driest on record. That has a lot of folks, including local climate experts, thinking that wildfire season is already underway.
Should a wildfire spark in your area this season, it is critical that you have a plan. There are 3 types of evacuation levels. Here's an explainer from OSFM. Level 1, be ready. Stay informed by checking emergency service websites and your local newscasts. Be prepared to move vulnerable people, belongings, and pets, and monitor emergency alerts. Level 2, be set. Be set to leave at a moment's notice. Consider going to a shelter or staying with others outside the area. Monitor emergency alerts. And level 3, go now. Evacuate immediately. If you feel threatened, do not wait for an evacuation order. Thanks for joining us for this special presentation of Familiar Threat 2025 wildfire season.
We hope we've helped alleviate some concerns going into fire season and offered you tools to help you be prepared.
The following program is sponsored by Keep Oregon Green and Travel Oregon.